I've got no strings to hold me down, to make me fret or make me frown. I had strings, but now I'm free. There are no strings on me. Pinocchio is back, y'all. Just in a completely new nose-growing when he be lying ass-kicking fashion. liesofp dropped this last week, and everyone buckle up, you guys are in for an amazing ride. I'm here to talk to you guys about liesofp this week and whether or not it's good or bad, and in my estimation, this one has knocked it absolutely positively out of the park. So with a quick overview, liesofp is about our titular puppet, but holy crap, does it come with a gigantic twist. As we are slowly fed into the game after our awakening from the slumber of Pinocchio, we learn that Krat has been overtaken by similar puppets like us due to the actions of our creator Geppetto. Now what we learn is that we need to make it to Hotel Krat, Hotel Kratofornia. And when we get there, we will find all the different survivors who are human, who haven't been killed by our brother and sister puppets, and we kind of learn from there that Geppetto's been kidnapped, shit's kind of hit the fan, and we need to help them stop it. While we're there, we meet our counterpart Sophia, who is going to basically shepherd us through this adventure, and we get the first big name from the fairy tale, Gemini, the cricket, in a lantern, who's going to hang out with us for the majority of our run and just, you know, kind of spit out things at us like the Jiminy Cricket from the movie. So once we're tasked with getting out there and finding Geppetto, it is off to the races. I'm not going to ruin the story by giving away all the things that happened during it, but suffice to say, pretty much everything that you may know or may not know from the fairy tale for that matter has been packed into this game in one shape, way, or form. Although all of these characters have been rethought into probably different visions of themselves, you have mainstays from the fairy tale like the Red Fox and the Black Cat, the Puppet King for God's sake, and the one and only Mangiafuoco. If you're unfamiliar with any of these names, I don't know what to tell you. This game is based off of a fairy tale, and all of these names are relevant in the fairy tale, so I don't know, go look it up on Wikipedia or something, I don't care. So what follows when you finally leave the Hotel Krat is a mad dash through this city and trying to piece together the mystery of why these puppets are killing everyone, why Geppetto is been taken by the Puppet King, and where your place is as Pinocchio through the entirety of the story. By the way, we've been having a great time playing this one on my Twitch channel, so you should probably go ahead and jump over there at some point in time. You know, go hit the follow button, maybe catch me playing this one or other Soulsbornes in the future. Hell, even a bunch of other games that normally you may not have ever wanted to check out. So liesofp was marketed as a Soulsborne Sekiro-like, just like so many other titles before it. And the meat and potatoes of all these games has always been the combat, the weapons, the upgrades for those weapons, being able to use different builds, and how you progress through it, utilizing those different skills. So the major question when it comes to this meat and potatoes, did liesofp knock this one out of the park? It absolutely did. Seeing a few other titles come out in recent history that I've been trying to emulate FromSoft's success, looking at Mortal Shell, Thymesia, Steel Rising, and not really hitting the mark, liesofp has done an excellent job of taking facets of each one of those games and injecting it into what has turned out to be a pretty goddamn good title. So we're going to start with the first major thing that I just talked about, and that seems to be the mainstay of all these different kinds of games, and that's the combat. The overwhelming majority of Soulsborne game are going to try to get you wrapped up in dodging, parrying, attacking, smacking around your opponent when they give you an appropriate opportunity. And to this point, P has done a really good job of making all of these feel incredibly satisfying as you make your way through the world and the city of Krat. Dodging is something that you can do early on, even though it's not wholly effective, like right off the bat. We're going to get into more of that here in a little bit. But it's still a major tool that you can use to survive as you're making your way through the game. The thing is, like in some of these games, I'm looking at Dark Souls and Dark Souls 3, or even Elden Ring for that matter, dodging has always been a huge thing because it gives you iframes and it's an easy way to dodge out of almost any attack. liesofp has gotten around that by putting in what are considered undodgeable attacks on each one of the enemies that you encounter in the world. So what this means is that unless you're running your happy ass away from certain enemies when they're doing a unblockable attack, which is denoted by a red sheen around them, then you're definitely going to get popped whether you're dodging well or not. So while this might rub you a little bit the wrong way as you're hearing this review and I'm talking about it, developer NeoWiz has done this with a very specific idea in mind. So this brings us to the parrying and guarding aspect of the game. In liesofp, you have the option to both guard and parry. Now, what this means is that you can guard and just essentially take a blow from an enemy, but it will do a little bit of chip damage, or you could have the option of actually doing what is called a perfect parry. Now, the cool thing about the guard aspect of this is that it takes a lot of influence from a game like Bloodborne, where in Bloodborne, if you decided to block an enemy and not try to parry it or something like that, you would take a little bit of damage, but it gave you an option to also counterattack as kind of a rally, and you could get some of that damage back as health and continue on your way without it being too heavy of a loss. What I find is that this particular mechanic of the game keeps the stakes a little bit high when you're in combat in Lies of P, because it's not just a, hey, I'm gonna get in there, I'm gonna dodge, I'm gonna back up, I'm gonna look for an opening when I know the pattern of this enemy is set and I don't have to worry about them hitting me, and I can start doing damage. This is also a good time to mention that those unblockable attacks that I was mentioning before with the dodge, you can't guard against them either. If you try to guard against an unblockable attack, you're getting popped right in the grill and you are absolutely taking full damage. Excuse me, Garçon, full damage, party of one. Your table is ready. Now, this is where the parry function that we were talking about in Lies of Peace really does shine. The last option that you have in damage mitigation in this game is one of its brightest accomplishments and one of the coolest things going that I have seen in a lot of these different titles. The first big thing is that you never take full damage on a successful parry. Enemies' attacks ping right off of you, and you can continue about your way without ever having to think about what's going on or looking at your health bar. The other great thing about parrying in this game, if you do it perfectly, is that you're also going to generate what I can only describe as a stagger mechanic for each one of the enemies that you encounter. Now, once you get to a point where you've perfectly parried enough and potentially done a couple attacks in the middle of it, particularly heavy attacks might seem to increase this gauge as well, you're going to notice that the life bar of the enemy lights up, and that at that point in time, you're able to do a charged strong attack that will put them on their ass, and then you can walk up and just recklessly crush them and also get into a position for what is an execution attack. So the cool thing about the execution attacks is that it will almost always kill a small enemy. It'll do a whole shit ton of damage to an elite enemy, and you can do this to bosses as well. If you actually manage to perfect parry a boss enough to get it to the point where you can do this charged up strong attack and knock them on their behinds where they're essentially stunned, you can get into place for one of these execution attacks, and depending on what your build is and what kind of weapon you're using, you could do as much as 1/3 of their health, probably all the way down to 1/5, but usually nothing too incredibly, overbearing. Again, it's worth noting that the charge up strong attacks with your different weapons will help increase the stagger mechanic, but the fastest way to get there is absolutely through this use of this mechanic called perfect parry. One last fun fringe benefit about the perfect parry in this game is that if you are fighting an enemy long enough and you are able to perfect parry them enough, you will break their weapon and reduce how much damage they can do, usually by right around 50%. What? Pretty goddamn cool thing when you're going through this game and you feel like you're up against something particularly difficult. You know that you can just learn how they're going to go about their business, parry each one of their attacks, and eventually it won't matter if they hit you or not, because they're not going to do enough damage to make it matter anyway. So this leads us to our hero's equipment. I'd be doing you wrong if I did not immediately tell you after that little diatribe about the breaking the enemy's weapon through parrying. Well, in Lies of P, Pinocchio also has the unfortunate thing that could happen where his weapons can break as well. This is why our boy P carries around a handy dandy grinder on his mechanical arm that he can put his weapon into any point in time and just go ahead and sharpen it right back up to full durability in the middle of any fight or while you're traversing from one area to another. It's also worth mentioning here that you can upgrade that grinder as you make your way through the game so that these different grindstones can give some of your base weapons like an elemental attack like electricity or fire. It's something really neat that Neo has put into this game, and I find it very interesting because you can change them out on the fly for any kind of situation. The downside is that you can only do it once per rest, so you have to use it judiciously, but the fact that it's there and you can use it against bosses is pretty damn cool. So when it comes to repairing your weapon on the fly, this is something that you are going to have to pay attention to. Now the bright side is that through most of the game, you're not usually going to have to worry about this mechanic of having to grind your weapon back up to full durability, because most fights are pretty, short and to the point, and in between those times, you're going to have time to grind it out. But when you're in the middle of a boss fight, you're going to have to pay attention because you could be in the middle of fighting this guy, and out of nowhere, if you haven't been looking, your weapon is going to break. So what does it mean when your weapon's gonna break? Well, oh yeah, no big deal, right? You're just gonna go get it repaired. No. In Lies of P, if your weapon breaks, if you are not paying attention, that weapon is gone for the duration of the run. You will never see it again. You cannot do anything with it. It is gone and useless to you. Like I said, this isn't necessarily a constant concern, but if you're really in love with a weapon and you're in the middle of a really hard boss fight and you're really trying to learn its moveset and suddenly you find yourself with nothing in your hands, you might be a really sad panda because all the upgrades you put into that weapon or all the time and effort you've put into learning it, it's suddenly going to no longer be an option for you. Now, on the topic of that, I just mentioned the weapons being leveled up and stuff like that. True to form, as is in most Soulsborne games, you have the option of upgrading your weapon with certain materials and increasing its effectiveness. You also know that your stats are going to affect it, like most other Soulsborne game. In Lies of P, you have something like motividity, which is basically your strength stat, or technique, which is your dexterity stat, right? And in a lot of these games, there's always like the magic stat that may affect the elemental damage any one of these weapons actually do. And in this game, it's called advanced. That's the one that's going to affect the different, elemental damage types. The really cool thing about the weapons in this game, though, is that they've introduced this awesome mechanic, in my estimation, where they're both divided. Every weapon is divided into both a blade and a handle. So what this means is that in the course of the game, you can eventually start changing around all these different parts so that your build may make certain things that you find as you're making your way through it more effective. So hey, you just found this new weapon that has a certain handle that you love the moveset on. Maybe you don't like the blade on it. Maybe you want to put on a blade that does some kind of elemental damage. So what you do is you take that handle, you take that blade, you smash them together, and suddenly you have a brand new weapon that has different effects. It's affected by different stats, and it's just something completely new and something that you can continue to move forward with. Another big bonus here is that you can also find certain consumables in the game that will change the primary stat of each one of these blades. So for example, you find a blade that is primarily a strength or motivity focused blade. You're able to change it into one that might be more dependent on the technique or dexterity stat. What this means ultimately is that you have an endless array of options out there when it comes to swapping around these pieces and parts and changing what affects them and what makes them more effective. It's worth noting here that blades are the only part of the weapon that you upgrade, so when you find the different upgrade parts, you're only upgrading the blade, and the handle always stays static and does the same thing no matter what. I found this system to be incredibly inventive and cool because I've never seen anything like this in any of the other Soulsborne games, and it really has lent itself to a lot of experimentation and figuring out a few different combinations that you may not have normally thought about before to bring forth maximum effectiveness. You also have a persistent side weapon in Lies of P. Pinocchio's left arm is a Legion arm, making him look very much like the puppet he actually is instead of the otherwise very human-looking presentation of the gentleman. Cool thing about the Legion arms is each one of them has a different ability. One has an ability that you can reach out and sling a dart towards somebody. Think Scorpion from Mortal Kombat. Get over here and I'm just gonna smash you into bits. Another one allows you to smack things around with a closed fist and apply electricity damage. Another one is essentially a flamethrower. And these are just a few of the different options you're gonna have as you make your way through the game. These Legion arms also come with a ability to upgrade them as well to make them more effective. You can make the flamethrower reach out a little bit farther. You can make it so that the scorpion dart that you can throw out to draw people in, you can actually dodge in the middle of it. So you'll sling it out there. They're going to be coming in, but as they're coming in, you can dodge to the side, or you can even rope yourself into them if you so choose. Like most Soulsborns, you also have different armor pieces that you can slot in and out to make you more combat effective in certain situations. Each one of these different parts will increase certain resistances, whether it's an elemental resistance or a physical damage resistance, or, the commonplace rock, paper, scissors that you find in a lot of these games. Like its contemporaries, though, Lies of P is also kind of suffers from the you can change these things out and you can try to be a little bit more effective at something, but it really turns out to be not that big of a deal unless you're really hyper focusing on that one thing. You'll also find that you have a couple amulet slots in exchange for the ring slot you see in most of the Soulsborne games. Now with these different amulets, you'll see a lot of the normal Soulsborne kind of tropes. This amulet increases your HP. This amulet increases your weight limit because, let's face it, the heavier you are in any of these games, the less mobile you are, and some of them will increase certain types of damage and etc. Lastly, when it comes to items, you look at the vast amount of consumables that I feel like most people in a lot of these games never use anyway, except for the ones that generate the currency, again called ergo, the one that you're going to use to level up and the one that you're going to use to upgrade, or the one that you're going to use to buy other consumables that you'll probably never use. Otherwise, you'll still have a set of offensive and defensive consumables, you know, ones that you can chuck at someone for a little bit of chip damage, or other ones that are going to take away certain status effects. Pretty much, you know, the standard when it comes to any kind of Soulsborne game. Speaking of upgrades, our boy P can also be upgraded just in his base form. Now, what you'll find is through your progress in Lies of P, after a certain event, you're going to be able to sit Pinocchio down in a chair, and you're going to be able to kind of mess around with his inner workings and make him a little bit more effective in certain ways. You'll find things like, you know, being able to heal a bit more. You're going to have more options to, you know, heal multiple times, because much like most of the other Soulsborne games, you can only heal so many times in between stargazers or bonfires. I'm sure that we all know that everything is a bonfire. It doesn't matter what the game's calling it. So when you're getting in between these bonfires or stargazers, you only have so many times you can heal, and one of the upgrades you can have is increasing the amount of times you can heal. Another upgrade that you can get is adding a dodge onto the back of your other dodge. I noted this earlier when I said that dodge isn't necessarily as effective as it could be in the game, but they did put something in that might make it a little bit more useful. Or you can even add more fable slots, and this is something I haven't touched on yet, but fable slots are essentially a way for you to perform special attacks with each one of your weapons that do something pretty cool, do some extra damage, make you a little bit more resilient to, you know, incoming attacks, etc., etc. And the only reason I didn't really mention it before is because, yes, I think people are going to use it when they're playing the game, but it's one of those things that it generates usually relatively slowly, and you're only going to use it in pretty extreme cases like boss fights. So each one of these power-ups is going to be attained by spending quartz, and you're going to have to spend 2 quartz per each one of these power-ups. So if you do want that additional heal, it's going to cost you 2 quartz. Quartz is pretty rare in the game. You're not going to find it very often, but it does come with the bright side that every time you use a quartz to try and upgrade to get one of these abilities open, you also get a small minor perk as well. So you find yourself going for that extra healing, you may actually make it so that the first piece of quartz you put in there, every time you block, you charge more fable, or maybe you get a little bit more time to get back more of that life after blocking, you know, like you're sitting there blocking all these things and you only retain, you know, so much of the damage as potential life gain back if you want to counterattack. Some of these upgrades will give you a bigger window. Some of these like abilities will allow you to generate more so that you can just stay alive longer. Lastly, the world of Lies of P is absolutely gorgeous. The different locations that you're going to end up exploring in this game really do feel so much different than the last and keep their own unique identity as you make your way through the game. I think it's really worth noting for a game like this because a lot of the times you see some of these games that come out in the Soulsborne genre all tend to kind of blend in with one another. Like the only thing that you're really focusing on is the very well done action and combat. And even if you take the time to digest the things around you, it might look relatively the same as it did in the last part. And in Lies of P, that's just not the case. You'll also see a good bit of enemy variety in this game as well. You know, in a lot of these games, you'll see the same enemies regurgitated over and over with not really a whole lot of difference. But in Lies of P, even down to the minor enemies, you're going to see that there is a pretty big variety of what you're going to have to deal with and what you're going to have to learn so that you can continue to succeed. Bosses are big, they're tough, and they definitely have the Soulsborne learning curve that so many of the big bads have in these titles. So veterans of this genre are going to have a pretty good time learning these different enemies and figuring out what best way to approach them. It's also worth noting here that the game is going to have a very linear feel. If it's something that you don't necessarily enjoy about this genre, you're going to have to be made aware of that now. Lies of P is definitely a game that's pretty much on rails, and you're going to know where you're going at all times with very little, you know, nuance in between. The cool thing, though, is that even if as you go into each one of these areas, it does encourage you to explore what is there because you can find some hidden stuff, some secret stuff, and you will become better for it if you do so. All right, to wrap this whole thing up into a nice tight package, is Lies of P a great Soulsborne, and is it worth your time and money? Firstly, yes. Lies of P is an absolute blast of a game and an awesome entry into the Soulsborne genre. It hits all the right notes, it does all the right things when it comes to one of these games, and in terms of it not being a FromSoft title, which has pretty much been the only dev that's come out with a lot of good games in this genre, with the exception of games like Neo and some others, Lies of P has brought a really solid entry into this genre, and I do feel like it ranks up there with even the original Dark Souls or Dark Souls 3. I also say that with knowing that it's from an indie dev as well. We know that NeoWiz, the dev of this game, isn't necessarily as big as FromSoft, and you can't really set its expectations to the same level as Dark Souls 3 or Dark Souls or even Elden Ring. But from working with what they had, this game really does knock everything out of the park. Even if there aren't as many side quests and different NPCs and things like that, the game is still an absolute pleasure and joy to play. Now, second, is it worth the price tag? Honestly, at first I didn't think so, but on reflection, I do honestly believe that most folks will have an absolute blast with this game for the $60 that they're going to have to pay for it, unless they're playing it on Xbox Game Pass, which I certainly did. It's an incredibly well-crafted game with a lot of very cool, unique mechanics that I think are going to lend it to a pretty good degree of replayability as you make your way through it and want to do different runs. You can also take previous runs into New Game Plus scenarios and continue to upgrade P and really open up everything that the game has to offer. The ability to approach the game in different ways, even from the outset, is also another one that I feel gives this game a lot of replayability and can really justify the price tag that NeoWiz has put on it. Ultimately, I do believe that the best barometer you can possibly have with this game is if you enjoyed any of the above, Elden Ring or Dark Souls 3 or Bloodborne or Sekiro. You are going to have an absolute ball smacking the shit out of everything with Pinocchio in Lies of P. So that does it for this review, everybody. I hope you enjoyed the Lies of P review that I just laid out for you. I hope I explained everything. If you have any questions, make sure that you put them down below. Be sure to like, subscribe, or don't like it if you don't like it, if I did a really goddamn bad job of reviewing this game. Otherwise, make sure you go hit the Twitch channel. There's a good chance I'll be playing this at some point in time in the near future, and I really hope you enjoyed it. I hope you guys get out there, kick the shit out of everything with our boy Pinocchio, and have an absolute blast doing it. I will see you on the next one. Old man's out.